Greetings to members of the Board of Governors of AJC and to many of our staff who are here from across the country and from our New York office as well. This conversation continues a tradition which we've had on this stage. We had Samantha's predecessor, Susan Rice. Many of you will recall. We had before that, with the help of Peter Rosenblatt, Richard Holbrooke. We had John Bolton. We've had other ambassadors that you know well, including Ron Persaud, Israel's ambassador to the UN, and Gerard Arreau, sitting here in conversation with our Board of Governors. And I think the response today, Samantha, speaks volumes about the eagerness to hear from you. Very briefly, because this audience knows Samantha Power, otherwise you wouldn't be here. We have an extraordinary advocate for human rights and human dignity. Samantha has devoted her entire professional life to those subjects, has traveled the world as journalist, has taught as Harvard Kennedy School professor, has written as author of the legendary A Problem from Hell, which if you haven't read, I urge you to read, and has now seen whether everything she understood outside government, once in government, first at the National Security Council, dealing with multilateral affairs and human rights, and now as our nation's permanent representative to the United Nations, can be translated effectively from protest and outrage and concern into policy and outcome and output. So we're thrilled to have Samantha Power here. And Samantha, just a word about AJC, although you know something about us. It's not by accident that we have these conversations. AJC was there at the founding conference of the United Nations in San Francisco in 1945. We were very active in seeking to ensure the inclusion of human rights protections in the UN Charter. We were very active together with one of your heroes, Raphael Lemkin, whose funeral, I might add, we funded because there were so few people around to assist him when he died at the age of 59, if I recall. But his commitment to the Genocide Convention and to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and your commitment were our commitments then, at the time, and since. And many leaders of AJC have been either ambassadors to the UN. Arthur Goldberg, one of your predecessors, was president of AJC. At least 5 or 6 of our lay leaders have been our representative to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva before it changed its name. Felice Guerre, who's here, is one of the elected members of the UN Convention Against Torture for many years, and I believe you know each other quite well. So AJC's connection to the UN is quite powerful, and I think you know, Samantha, that the Barbara Hepworth sculpture in front of the UN Secretariat building was a gift to the UN by Jacob Blaustein, the president of AJC, whose name is also on this building. So the discussion has a historical context. I want to begin, Samantha, by asking you that question that I really teed up. Being in government and being outside of government, have you been able to address in your own mind effectively your concern about the violations of human rights around the world that so upset you, that informed your book? Is government built to respond to these things effectively? Is there more that government can and must do? What are your thoughts?
Well, first, let me just thank you for having me and say I'm both incredibly honored to be here, but especially honored to see so many people and so many friends and people I don't yet know, but really looking forward to getting to know over the course of my what I hope will be a long and rich tenure in the job. On your question, I am kind of curious. I've been doing a fair amount of media because I'm just back from Mali, and I'm sure this will come up in the discussion, but on Syria, needless to say, we have some concerns on the chemical weapons front, and we're dealing also with one of the most grave humanitarian crises I've ever seen in my lifetime, with starving children, literally kids looking like if you remember the Ethiopian famine, I mean, seeing people from that region with distended bellies and so forth. And so we're pushing at the United Nations Security Council, where we've not had hardly any success because of the Russian position over the course of the conflict, for a resolution on humanitarian access and so forth. And I was in the Central African Republic, which is a place now where people are being killed really on religious grounds alone, where Muslims are going after Christians and Christians Muslims in a way that's very dark and just incredibly disturbing. But in doing media around these various crises, I'm wondering at what point people will stop saying, as the author of A Problem from Hell, how does it feel? And I don't know that other cabinet officials have their past works dredged up on them to quite the same extent. But I take the question and I take the point. It's obviously, something that people are curious about. I will say I just feel, again, especially given the gravity of the kinds of issues that I've described, never mind some of what we'll talk about in terms of Israel within the UN and the delegitimation and so forth, just that I'm so lucky to be in this job rather than being the person writing the book that you hope will get read by the person in this job. That was a crazy ambition. I started working on that book when I was in law school, and it was even, it was sort of a pipe dream that someone in this job would read the book if I ever even could finish the book. My mother described A Problem from Hell as my relationship to writing the book over 7 years. So, in any event, I feel I'm not conflicted. This is exactly where one should wish to be in the face of those horrors. To your question on government, I think we've come a long way. President Obama has really prioritized atrocity prevention. And what that means is not that the human heart changes or that people become less inclined to do terrible things, but it means that the United States will not treat our response as a choice between doing nothing and sending in the Marines, which was really something that I described, I think, over time. It doesn't mean you like the outcomes. Syria, we are not satisfied. No one can be, given, again, the strategic consequences and the moral horror that is underway. But what I can tell you is that what I learned from, again, being an amateur historian on the prior cases is that when it was so horrific, the temptation was to turn away entirely and not do the things, for instance, during the Holocaust, that we look back and we think, how could we not have done that? How could we not have taken more refugees? How could we not have bombed the train tracks? I think what you see is now a much earlier opening of the toolbox and deployment of a whole host of tools, even if, in a democracy, you're always going to bump up against that very difficult question of when do you employ American military force, where even in this room we'd probably have substantial disagreement about where that line should be drawn. But none of us would disagree on admitting refugees or sanctioning wrongdoers or trying to get people behind bars who've been the perpetrators of mass atrocity or building international coalitions or, strengthening the rules of peacekeeping. So those are the things that you do, and it doesn't mean that you, again, cure the world of genocide by any means or mass atrocity, but it does mean that you don't look back and say, how did we not do those things that just could have made a difference and that might be affecting the calculus of people who every day are deciding how far they want to go. I think that's also the lesson, is that you have to disaggregate even the idea of the state. It's a bunch of individuals, like you or me, thinking, how far am I going to take this today, given the risks, of people within my society, given that people are putting a lot of pressure on me to go in one direction, is there anybody putting pressure to go in another direction? So, and I think the president, again, this has been a major priority of his. When I was at the White House, I got to see it up close, and now it comes up in every one of our atrocity and human rights-related discussions.
I'm sure it'll be of interest to the audience. How did this concern of yours, this lifelong concern, actually begin? I'm not sure everyone in the audience knows, but you were born in Ireland. You came here, I think, at the age of 9. settled in Atlanta. There are some people from Atlanta here.
Yeah.
At what point in your life did this interest get triggered, and why?
You know, we project backwards onto various experiences. You know, I don't really know, but
Project, no one here is going to challenge you.
True, I know, too. For me, the most, I had two foundational experiences. One, all I wanted to be when I grew up was a sportscaster. So while working at the CBS Sports affiliate in Atlanta, Georgia, the summer after my freshman year in college, there were images that came down live on the CBS feed. I was taking notes on a Braves-Padres game. And these were the dark years for the Braves. And on this live feed came again, just fresh, uncut, unfiltered images from Tiananmen Square. And I just thought, what am I doing with myself here? But of course, like most people, felt, well, what could I ever do to make a difference in dealing with a crackdown or a dictatorial regime? So it made me focus as much on my studies as my half-hour sports talk show that I had at night during college. And then when I graduated, I had a wonderful privilege. I got to work for a man named Morta Bromowitz. He was a kind of dean of the diplomatic corps and had gone on to become president of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. And I went to work for him, and he was consumed with the images and the realities of what was going on in Bosnia. And I know the AJC and the Jewish community was amazing. This is one of the things I came to appreciate even more when I went back in my book and looked at all the previous cases of mass atrocity. And a major factor was that the Jewish community in the United States, a factor behind finally, generating a response that brought the atrocities and the genocide to an end, was the noise made by this community. And you were part of it, and you remember. The part of the challenge is often society is either confused or alienated, and so there's not a lot of political pressure on leaders to do more in the face of mass atrocity. That had been a historical phenomenon. But with that, again, the Jewish community leading on behalf of Muslims who were being terrorized by their Serb neighbors principally. And so for me, when I saw the images of emaciated men behind barbed wire in Europe, this was 1993, I thought, there's just something wrong with this picture. So I went, the Carnegie Endowment was in the same building as U.S. News and World Report, and so I went and explained to the editor-reviewer, or the chief of correspondence, that I had covered the Yale women's volleyball team, and thus was prepared to go and be a war correspondent, and he kind of did not embrace that as readily as one I hoped. And so I went off on my own. He promised he would take a phone call. I think he was sort of amused. But I went over, and it was a very welcoming community of journalists, many of whom were motivated by just what motivated me. I mean, people referred openly to the Spanish Civil War and this being, a cause that just seems so clear-cut. It was also, of course, just after the Cold War had ended, so there was a question of how American power was going to be employed and how we exercised our leadership in that phase, the sort of between phase. The post-Cold War phase. And so it seemed the stakes were high because of the people involved on the ground, and they were high because of the America, I think, that many of us sought to see leading in the world.
Samantha, let's switch gears. You mentioned earlier the Middle East and Israel in particular. Mm-hmm. And one of the things you said early on was that I'm going to stand up for Israel at the UN. AJC has been concerned for many years about the structural and systemic hurdles to Israel's full participation in the UN. You, to your great credit, tackled some of them already. One with big success, which was the entry of Israel into WEOG in Geneva, which we celebrated with you. What's on the agenda now in terms of overcoming those hurdles and allowing Israel to be nothing more or less than a normal member state of the UN?
We've sort of got several prongs. The first is opposing strenuously, aggressively, on every front, unilateral attempts by the Palestinians, but also by their backers and their instigators in the UN system, efforts to achieve unilaterally the kind of status that can only be forged through a peace process of the kind that is underway. Second, your point, how do you chip away at the systematic delegitimization that reveals itself in, circumstances where, I'll give you one example, which we were in the midst of a big push on. There's a group, these acronyms will drive you crazy, but called Juice Cans, which is
Nothing to do with Jews.
nothing to do with, yeah, exactly. No pun
That's the
intended.
problem.
Exactly. That's the inside baseball, the inside Juice Cans joke that only David and I get, which is unfortunate, but you two will get it soon, I hope. But it's a group, that has in it New Zealand and Canada and Norway and like-minded countries that kind of caucuses together. I mean, this is, again, sort of inside UN baseball, but Israel has a higher voting coincidence within the UN system with the countries who are part of Juice Cans than even the United States on human rights issues. And yet, we can't, Israel doesn't have a caucusing group. Everybody sort of has some home base to go to, and it's a like-minded group. So this is an example of a group just as a functional matter, right? In the interest of human rights, in the interest of force multiplying, about extending our voices together. Israel needs to be part of that group, and we're working it, and we hope to make progress on that soon. WEOG, of the Western European and other group, Israel needed to very much be part of that. There was no way that Israel was going to become part of the Arab group, for instance, or the Africa group, or the Asia group. I mean, this is no one likes to be an other, but the only thing worse than being an other is not being anything and not being in any regional group. And so finally, again, with the support of AJC and others of you in the room, we have secured Israel's membership, finally, in WEOG in Geneva. This was something Ambassador Holbrooke,
Yes.
my mentor and great friend, I miss him every day, but on something like that, I'd love to be able to share with him the sort of the symmetry of him being able to secure that for Israel in New York, and then finally we being able to do so in Geneva. So I use these two as examples of how do you chip away at the exclusion, as you say, make Israel more like any old country. And then the third thing, though, which we'd really welcome views on, is how do we showcase what Israel has to offer across the UN system, but even get beyond the UN and just in the international community. And so I was thrilled when I was at the White House to be able to work with my Israeli colleagues to try to push very early on in the wake of the Haiti earthquake for Israeli medics to be deployed to Haiti. And they got there like 4 days after the earthquake and had probably the highest standard of medical care of just about any international unit on the ground. And that was an all-hands-on-deck moment where we didn't have to go through the normal politics of exclusion because there was an earthquake. Like, at least in that circumstance, they were willing, the system as a whole just responded very, very promptly. But I'd love to see more examples like that. Israel just ran, Ambassador Prosser did a great job running a resolution on entrepreneurship in the General Assembly. And this provides a real problem for a lot of countries that are used to just voting no on whatever Israel does. But it's like, really? You want to vote no on the importance of entrepreneurship? And you look at the merits of the text, and it puts folks in an awkward position, but also, I think, requires them, some anyway, to take their ideological blinders off and sort of engage on the merits. I think getting Israelis into leadership positions within the UN system, we've had some success on that. We have, a senior Israeli on the counterterrorism executive directorate or whatever, a very strong Israeli lawyer. Israel was the vice president of the General Assembly not long ago. So again, looking for opportunities like that where it becomes more routine. I do, though, it's worth just reminding us all, really, because it just seems crazy that we aren't able to make more success or deliver more quickly. But it is worth remembering that more than half of the countries within the UN are not democratic. They're repressive, and they're looking for alibis, and they're looking to change the conversation from their own domestic circumstances and what they're not delivering to creating, something that might be popular on the street but will deliver nothing for their people. And so it's too easy in a way, and we try to make it hard for them to do that by again pointing to the facts and making a very functional case in terms of also what's good for other member states across the UN system. And it would be not just good for Israel, but good for the UN system as a whole.
We agree, and we thank you, Samantha. I mean, I think we all thank you for everything that's being done by the United States. Let me ask you just one other question, and I'd like to open it up to the audience. I'm sure there are many questions here. As a result of, really as a result of Dick Holbrooke's leadership, and it was relentless, and some of us saw it up close. As you said, Israel was admitted to WEOG here in New York. As a result, Israel submitted its candidacy for a Security Council seat down the road from within the WEOG group. And Germany has now entered as well. I think Belgium is the other candidate. So there are now 3 countries for 2 seats. Is there any realistic chance that Israel will defeat either Belgium or Germany? Or is the victory really in the symbolism of Israel finally running as a candidate for the Security Council seat?
Well, I'd say a couple things. First, we strongly support Israel's candidacy.
And we won't ask you which of the other 2 you support.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. Second, I'm a Red Sox fan, which has probably, at first blush, nothing to do with the answer to this question, but everything.
No, but it was a great applause line.
That's not usually in New York. But
up here we got 1, 2, 3, 4 Red Sox fans.
So.
Right? No, I'm counting.
So these men and women, unlike the Yankee fans in the audience, know what it's like to be down 3-0 in the American League Championship Series and still find a way to pull a rabbit out of the hat. And so it is not going to be easy. I mean, this is going to be very, very challenging. Given my point about the broader UN membership, this is a full-on 193-country vote. But anybody who's worked with me knows I will never give up. And I think I would go further and say, there's winning, which is our objective together. And then there's a lot in between. And it is going to be very challenging just in light of the politics of Israel within the UN and just the raw numbers. But we will do our best in capital, and I think getting on the ballot is a step. But actually using this as an occasion also, and I was encouraged by my discussion with Foreign Minister Lieberman at how much he's thinking in these terms about, is there more outreach we can be doing in Africa, sort of get beyond New York and go to capital, and then whether it's through bilateral assistance or through technical training or through trade or through tourism or, what are the ways to sort of work bottom up? And again, it's a long game. But I think if we are doing more and more of that, this will be another sort of chip away moment. But again, we go in, as we do with all things, seeking to achieve the ultimate success.